Good morning to everybody. Thank you for being here this morning so early. I would like to introduce you the first speaker of this session, of this parallel session, is Bastien Dufort. His research theme are related to environmental economics, energy economics, and international economics. Currently, he's working with the Bordeaux School of Public Health at the university, of course, and he has as a main research field environmental economics and also sport management. Today, he will introduce us his research on the influence of the carbon tax on cost competitiveness. Please, Mr. Dufort, the floor is yours.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to present you some results of my research today on the topic of security of energy. In this session, I will present a multi-sectoral model I built to evaluate the multi-sectoral and international impact of an energy shock. More precisely, the focus is made on the carbon tax and its impact on the unit cost of production in European sectors. So my starting point is that the cost of what we call the direct energy occupies a small part of total expenses in industry. You can see never more than 10% in all industries. And nevertheless, if we take a closer look at the origin of embodied energy, we remark that for most countries, national energy represents only between 40 and 60% of the total embodied energy. In other words, only half of the effect of energy prices on competitiveness is linked to national prices. So this indirect or hidden energy explains the strong link between energy prices and competitiveness. But it also brings to light the interdependencies between international sectors through the intermediate consumption. So taking into account energy is generally a synonym of the use of an input-output model. The idea is to compute the total carbon embodied in a production with the Leontief matrix. So here the total is summed up in the M matrix, and then to apply a tax on this amount. And fortunately, this kind of studies are mainly short-run analysis, as they consider that industries cannot reduce their emission nor substitute their inputs. So they don't permit to compute new equilibrium prices or new input demands. I mean, adapted to the changements. So the objective of my study is twofold. First, taking substitutability of inputs into account after a shock, and then proposing a modelization to compute ex post equilibrium. So the model I decided to use is a cost push model. This is a less known version of input-output models or Leontief models. This approach considers that quantities are fixed in input-output tables and that is price that vary, contrary to the classic Leontief model where prices are fixed and quantities are not. So the cost push model considers that the output price vector is equal to weighted price of all inputs. So you can see that in the equation, P represents the vector of production prices, W is the vector of wages, R the vector of capital prices, and all the C are matrix of technical coefficients. The idea is here is to add the carbon prices to this equality weighted by the amount of CO2 by unit of products. And with the linear reassumption of input-output analysis, we could compute equilibrium prices after a carbon tax. So in order to introduce flexibility in the model, because there's no for the moment, I also had to assume that the cost function of the input-output underlying technology takes the form of a generalized Leontief cost function. This functional thought respects the property of the cost-push model while allowing the flexibility of inputs. It also allows to compute new prices after a shock if the model uses physical data instead of monetary data. I retain a short or mid-term generalized Leontief cost function of the same form as the one used by Morrison, because I consider that industries operate on the short or mid-run with capital considered only as a quasi-fixed factor of production. The cost function in each industry depend here on all input prices, on cross prices, on time, on hourly wages, on capital. And through Shepard lemma, I can easily deduce input demand or technical coefficients. So in order to introduce then some dynamic, the model works in 3 steps. On the first steps, a shock in energy prices modelized by a carbon tax leads to new prices that are computed with the cost push model. On the second step, the model considers that we enter a new period, so new prices are reported in new production plans of industry. And with the hypothesis that industries cannot work under a static price expectation, then as we've seen, I consider that industries operate under flexible cost function, so I can compute new technical coefficients. On the last step, I reiterate the first step, but this time with the new technical coefficients and new prices, so I finally obtain new equilibrium prices consecutively to an input substitution. So for this study, I decided to use data from the WIAT database, World Input-Output database. Among all the WIAT data, I've chosen the major European countries and some of the biggest countries in the world, in order that these 18 countries represent almost 80% of world GDP during the period considered. In terms of carbon emission inside European countries, we could see that there is already a strong heterogeneity. Germany and United Kingdom are the most emitting countries in particular because of their energy sector that is more dependent on fossil fuel. As we've seen, GL cost function takes into account all cross-price relationships between industries and countries, what represents a huge number of estimates to make. So this pushed me to aggregate prices into 2 dimensions. First, I aggregated the price coming from the 34 industries in the country into prices of 6 aggregated sectors to simplify the cost function. I retain the assumption of constant return to scale because under this assumption, a constant the unit cost is equal to the unit price. And price are aggregated by a quadratic mean of order 1 that is consistent with the generalized Leontief form according to Professor Durat. Then, for each country, the price of an industry good is calculated as a geometric mean of all industry prices abroad, weighted by the share of imports from the different foreign countries on the total of all imports of goods in the industry. So now that I've built simplest prices, I can estimate my model using panel data with cost and technical coefficient functions that are estimated jointly. I chose that first order coefficient in the share equations could vary across countries. That's why I use a national intercept dummy variable in each equation. as the homogeneity between the same vector in every country is rejected by ratio tests, I had to pull countries into 5 groups, and the estimation is made using the method of the seemingly unrelated regression. After the equation estimates, I can compute the true technical coefficients from this simplest technical coefficients I've just presented. I can go back to the original technical coefficients, calculating the model using this form, just coming back to the beginning. After the calculation of equilibrium prices, these prices could be used in the implicit cost function to compute a unit cost of production for each sector in each country. So competitiveness effect is measured by the comparison of the extra unit costs between sectors and countries, and the result of each scenario can then be compared with results obtained with a business as usual scenario in order to assess the effect of the tax. So I decided to apply 6 scenarios using different level of tax or considering different countries setting a tax. Concerning the level of the tax, I chose the 2 extremities of the range that permit to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement. I mean, price of carbon comprised between $40 and $80 by ton of CO2. Concerning the countries supporting the tax, first I apply the tax on the European level. So France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, and Spain are submitted to the tax, but not the United Kingdom, because it's no longer part of the European Union. And the 2 remaining scenarios consist of applying the carbon tax on France or on Germany only. I will just present the results on the $80 per ton of CO2 scenario because it seems the more adapted to the actuality today. So with the exception of France, the energy sector suffers from a strong increase in of unit cost in each European countries, with increases that vary from 5.5% to 8%, around 8%. Then European manufacturing sectors are the most impacted, so their competitiveness would be strongly penalized as it is already on the decline. If we compare countries, Poland is by far the most impacted by the tax, contrary to France, what is certainly due to its non-emitting nuclear power plant. After Poland, it is Spain that reduces the most is cost competitiveness. So these differences of impact between sectors, but also between countries, could explain the difficulties we have to find an European or even an international agreement. Because the stronger loss of competitiveness compared to other countries seems to be more difficult to accept on the political view. So today countries tend to act by their own. So I also simulate the effect of a unilateral tax on France or on Germany only. And unsurprisingly, results show that Germany is more impacted by a unilateral carbon tax than France. This is not surprising regarding to the level of emission. I mean, German industries' total emissions are 2 or 3 times bigger than France ones. And apart from the energy sector, French sectors escape the effect of the tax. I mean, the increase of unit cost doesn't exceed 1%, no more, and it shows that French competitiveness would not be damaged by carbon tax. Manufacturing sector, which is key in the German economy, is damaged by a 2% increase in unit cost, while its competitors are exempted of the diffusion of the tax. only Poland, but in a very few mountains, suffers from the German tax. And this is mainly because German manufacturing goods have a large share in Poland's imports. So the German carbon tax increases the price of Poland's intermediate inputs. It is also useful to distinguish to what extent a European carbon tax would increase the unit costs compared to a unilateral national tax. Indeed, the high level of trade between European countries contribute to spread the tax through intermediate consumption, and finally, the initial tax has indirect impacts all along the international supply chain. This is the idea here. I mean, the European carbon tax increases the loss of competitiveness of German sectors compared to French sectors. If German sectors are more exposed to the European carbon tax than French sectors, it may be for three reasons. First, because the direct effect, I mean, there are more carbon emitters. Second, a national indirect effect, because their national partners are more carbon emitters. And last, because the international indirect effect, because their European or international partners are more carbon emitters. So finally, two issues emerge from the study. From my point of view, the first one is a carbon border adjustment or border tax, and then the recycling of the tax. So first, to preserve the European Union from these non-expected impacts and from the lost competitiveness, the European debate now is about carbon border tax. We've seen in my previous results that the carbon tax has different impacts and costs, depend of if the tax relies on direct or indirect emissions. The idea is the same here with the border tax, depending of if it is calculated on the basis of the final producing sector or not. I mean, if it's based on the final producing sector, it incites the European partners to add a final non-emitting stop in the supply chain before coming to Europe, and then European prices would remain less competitive. And if the border tax is calculated on the total carbon embodied, in that case, European exports are triply penalized compared to non-European countries. I mean, first, the carbon tax already directly increases the global cost of production, while the border adjustment increases the cost of intermediate goods. And moreover, non-European countries will certainly reply to the border tax with other taxes on European exports, which will triply, in my view, penalize European industries. Nevertheless, and hopefully, a border tax has also benefits because it discourages carbon leakage to a certain extent, and it preserves competitiveness of European industries on the local markets if they are more virtuous than non-European ones. And to finish, these differences of impact between sectors, and even mostly between countries, put forward the necessity to smartly redistribute the product of the tax. So this aspect of the tax is often forgotten in the debate, whereas the critical point to the success of common taxation. It seems that it is these problems of heterogeneity that have avoided the adoption of a European carbon tax so far. And those problems have led countries to act unilaterally. Building a national carbon tax allows each country to adapt the specificity of the tax to its national particularity. Indeed, we've shown that the effects of the tax are different among national sectors. This is why, in my view, a good recycling of the tax, I mean into the most impacted industries, could attenuate the loss of competitiveness and could, I hope, favorize a future international agreement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dufault. I would like to give immediately the word to Paolo Bertoldi. He works for the European Commission Joint Research Center. He's a doctor degree in electrical engineering, and he works for the JRC and the commissions since 1985. So he has a very long experience by managing several projects, and he's also a principal administrator of the European Commission Joint Research Center, in charge of research activities on energy efficiency policy, and he also manages green light, motor challenge, standby initiative programs on behalf of the DG TREN. Today he will introduce us with his research on EU energy and climate policies to reach carbon neutrality. The floor is yours, Paolo Bertoldi. We should maintain our speech around 20 minutes, please. You are muted.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chairman, for the introduction. Can you see my screen now?
If you set the full screen is better.
Okay, it's better now?
Yes.
So, good morning. I'm going to present the EU energy and climate policy to reach carbon neutralities. I think there is no doubt that there is an increase in the average temperature over the last 100 years. We are more or less plus 1 degree. And this is, again, strong evidence that is related to greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, all these scientists are agreeing on this correlation and on the temperature increase. What does it mean for our Earth system? It means a lot of disruptions. We know the glaciers are melting, the sea level is rising, and you see a picture on the right according to different concentration of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And for coastal area is very damaging. And then we have a more frequent and extreme severe events, floods, hurricanes. For example, this year there was a record number of strong hurricanes in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean areas. Heat waves, drought, forest fires, these are some real damages of climate change. The greenhouse gases emission trends are still increasing. You see on the left the absolute number with China driving, US and other major economies. And then is also very important also to understand also the per capita level of greenhouse emissions. And some, of course, the OECD countries are leading this. Some developing countries are quickly catching up, but are far below this one. So it's not a matter of just saying to all the countries reduce your emission, but also to look this in a frame of equity and climate justice. More in general, as I said, the trend is still rising. The IPCC and not only the IPCC recommend some pathway to go towards carbon neutrality and then stay after the middle of the century around carbon neutrality. So it means balancing the residual emissions with carbon absorbing solutions. And to be inside this path, we have to, as soon as possible, peak the emissions. And this is also the Paris Agreement saying this, and also drive down as much as possible emissions. And this graph basically showed that under current business as usual scenarios, our emission will still increase till 2030. If we do it, if all countries around the world will implement their national thermic contribution, I come back to this, we're still away from a 1 degree or 1.5 pathway. And the difference between these unconditional NDC scenarios and the required 2 degree, 1.5 degree pathways is so-called the emission gap at 2030, which is still huge. So a lot of additional policy are needed to bring us back to these sustainable emission paths. And let's not forget that if now at 1 degree we see a major disruption already in our system, at 1.5, 1, 2, or 2 degrees, it will be even major. But if we don't do this, with the risk to have a 3 degree by the end of the centuries, which really say uncontrollable and very strong impact on our natural and ecosystem, which will really have a high impact on our economy and our lives and our society. Small island state may disappear, etc. The international policy contest in climate change started in the 90s with the IPCC, with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in '92. The first step was the Kyoto Protocol, and just highlighted this history to show what are the major steps and how was the response of the EU to these major steps. And the EU, since the beginning, since the establishment of the UNFCCC, has been a leading economy in driving the effort to reduce the impact of climate change by signing, for example, the Kyoto Protocol, reaching the target, and continue to do so until a new agreement was emerging, to the Cancun Agreement, to the COP in Durban, when a different approach was adopted, basically in trying to have more bottom-up participation by large developing countries like China, India, Brazil, which are responsible nowadays for a large share of emission, or global emission, which were not part of the Kyoto Agreement. So all you know, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed, tried to limit the temperature increase well below 2 degrees by the end of the centuries, and adopting a bottom-up approach, very different from the Kyoto Protocol, where each country has to do his best effort to make his own contribution to the fight to climate change in the national determined contribution that I already mentioned in the previous slides. And there should be also a race to increase this effort over time with the revision of their national determined contribution. The problem is there is no way for any country to be bound to have a target, and so it cannot be a top-down approach like in Kyoto Protocol, nor to adopt policies. And this is the major drawback. So let's hope that the voluntary participatory approach will work, but there is no assurance, legal assurance of this. Now turning to the European Union, how has responded to this international framework? In 2007, when the Kyoto Protocol period for 2018, 2008, 2012, not only this, but also in anticipated future agreement, the EU adopted the first set of climate and energy target with the famous 20% reductions by 2020. And with the baseline year as 1990, the European Commission is successful in meeting this target. Of course, we have to see the impact this year of COVID, which will further drown the emissions, but so far the experience has been good, but just good, not extremely good if we take in consideration things, but there's been a learning phase. So the period 1990 to 2010, 2012 has been a starting phase. Then, of course, in 2014, with the preparation of the Paris Agreement and the preparation of NDC, the European Union adopted more stringent target for 2030s, and there's a mistake in my slides, sorry, with minus 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 compared to 1990, and also more stringent targets for renewables, 32%, and for energy savings, 32.5%. We know that this is now history. Last week, the Council agreed on a cut of minus 55% by 2030, while the European Parliament is asking for 60%. So we will have at least 55% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. I will come back to this very important step for the revision of the European Union NDC as requested by UNFCCC by 2023. Turning now to the climate policies for climate mitigation, the European Union over the years implemented a number of policy instruments in the different sectors. I just named a few and I go details over these policy instruments. ETS, emission trading system, maybe is the most important one, the most famous, the most studied by scholars, and started in 2003 with a first period, which was a learning phase with allowance were all given for free to business. It covered power generation and the energy-intensive industries. The penalty for non-compliance was 40 ton. Unfortunately, there was some success in the sense that the system was started, all the mechanisms were put in place. There was a trade of emission allowances. There was for the first time a European carbon price, implicit carbon price in the price of allowances. But of course, the free allocation and the very generous number of allowances given to obliged subject resulted in a strong surplus of allowances, which was compounded by the economic crisis in 2008, and this meant that the price of the allowance fell to zeros, so no price signal to end user. Second phase, there was more auctioning of allowances, more stringent target, and the aviation sector was brought in 2012, but still it was a period of difficulties with the carbon price due to this surplus. Even the second phase generated surplus because we were through a strong economic crisis. But you can see that the number of allowances from the start to the end of the second period was increased dramatically from 300 million to almost 8 billion. Third phase started to be much more serious, is still the current phase. More sector and gases were included. They were set aside, and auctioning became the major way to distribute the allowances to subject under the scheme. Now we will very soon enter the fourth phase, where there is a European decrease in annual decrease of allowances. There is a market stability reserve, which has been introduced already in the third phase, very important to avoid the perverse effect that may result in a surplus of allowances, so a collapse of the prices. And there will be a free allocation of allowance for certain international companies to avoid the risk of carbon leakage, going very much in the same direction as the previous presentation. Moving on to another sector very important is the road sectors, and here road transport sectors. And as you know, the EU has regulated the European level the emissions, CO2 emission by private cars and vans since 2011 with the legislation which came into force after a voluntary agreement by the car manufacturer did not deliver the result expected. So we have now the famous target is a fleet target for each manufacturers with penalties if they don't meet this fleet target, which have to be paid into the EU budget. The current target is 95 gram per kilometer. And then now the new target will decrease this one by 50% and then almost 37% by 2030 for cars, a bit less for vans. And there is also a strong push for low or zero emission vehicles that can be used into this regulation in such a way that they get a bonus, the manufacturer, if they reach a certain target for these zero or low emission vehicles. There is also some trading elements in the sense that car manufacturers can pull together and reach a global fleeted average target. So it's a combination of regulation with some market-based element, very small, and penalties. And it's not, of course, an emission limit for every single car, but it's a fleet average. And it's a very important measures because we know that transportation is the most difficult sector to tackle in the European economy, and is the only sector which is still rising in emissions. There is also an important regulation that try to set hard target for the EU and member states for the non-ETS sector, so transport, buildings, agriculture, and waste. The target now is set at the 30% by 2030 and is then shared among the different member states. And this will complement the target of ETS, and between the 43% of ETS and the 30% target here, we should reach the minus 40%. Of course, this, as all the legislation I'm going to propose to you, is now under revision because the last week adoption of the minus 55%. So all the sectorial legislation is going to be revised by the European Commission, proposed to the European Council, and Parliament has all the need. We need more stringency in target and more additional policies and more effective policy and stronger policy. On the energy efficiency, we have a number of European policies applying to member states, like the Energy Efficiency Directive, which set the EU target on energy saving for 2020 and 2030s. Again, this has to be amended from 32.5 for 2030 to something in the range maybe of minus 40% energy savings. But of course, this is not yet established. There are now stakeholder consultation, impact assessment, etc. The energy companies obligations, which is a very interesting energy efficiency policy tools, has been imposed to all member states. All alternative measures is based on a very successful experience with the white certificate in Italy and France.
2 minutes left.
And sorry, please.
You have 2 minutes left. Sorry.
Okay. Very quickly, and very important action also reduce the energy consumption of buildings. With all of this, we see we are still far in 2018 from the 2020 target of minus 20%, and you can see the current 30% target. Of course, if we go to minus 40%, all the previous policy have to be strengthened. What is good that the EU policy has driven a sharp decline in the consumption of new buildings, and more or less is the same for all member states when the starting point was very different in level of stringency. Renewable policies, similar, there are a regulation, a directive setting the target and imposing the target to member state, a revision this now for 2030s, and again, a future revision. And you can see how the target of 2020 has been met or not met by individual member state. The jury is still out for the current 20% target. And of course, renewable energy is very important policy for the decarbonization of the economies and different sectors. There is a new climate law, 1 more minute and then I finish, which is unique, put a legally binding target for the EU to reach net zero greenhouse gases by 2050, and a system of monitoring and reporting the progress. This is very much linked to the governance of the Energy Union and climate actions, which already require member states to prepare national energy and climate plans for the period 2020 to 2030. The first plans were submitted at the end of 2020, have been analyzed by the Commission, and include also sub-plans for renewable energies and for energy efficiencies. Very quickly, conclusion. So, as you can see in this short presentation, there are several targets, umbrella target for greenhouse gas emission reductions, and then several targets, renewables, energy efficiency, effort sharing directive, and there is a need for a coherence among these targets and see how they work in supporting each other rather than creating confusion and diverging messages. A lot of different type of policy instruments, from market-based like ETS, like white certificate, to regulation for buildings and cars, to support research innovation, financing, information, for example, the new climate pact. There is, as I said, as for target, there is a need for coherence and complementarity among policy instruments. They should reinforce each other and work together. How can, for example, a white certificates scheme support ETS and vice versa? ETS is clearly the major instrument, setting a clear carbon price that could be an alternative to taxation, but also taxation should be examined again to see if it's needed, as in the previous presentation. There is a strong governance, monitoring, and of course, planning by member state. And finally, in this transition to a carbon neutrality society, we should not leave anyone behind. So attention to regions and cities which will be could be badly affected, like coal producing region, etc. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bertoldi. Now is my turn. I will share the screen because I'm chairing this session, but I'm also presenting. Okay. Okay. Yes, I will. I am Magime Gerbetti, and I'm with AIEE. I am the president of the scientific committee. I'm also the president of the scientific committee of this conference. And I thought that my presentation would have had more fit more with together with your especially the previous presentations and also to Gianluca's presentation. Okay, my research is about the climate change issues, the carbon border tax, the globalization, delocalization of industries, and emission reduction, of course. So what I have noticed is that living in this globalization context, what's happening is a sort of delocalization. Even we cannot use this term. What I call this delocalization is industrial nomadism. Because delocalization is a very complex issue and phenomena, but what is sure is that industry, the production industry, is not linked with the territory as it was before. And what the companies now are doing are competing within Europe, finding the best fiscal places and countries. We had with Ireland, we have cases in Europe, but also with other countries. So they are jumping from one country to another, and often they are reaching some that I call emissive paradise, where there are no environmental obligations, places like China or other countries. This is to say that the regulations that we have in place now to reduce emissions within this globalization context are not, they have limits. They have limits because it is not relevant for the moment where the company is placed. Is relevant what is the labor cost, what is the cost of the raw material, what are the environmental and energy commitments of those countries. I was saying that delocalization is a very complex phenomena, but about this industrial nomadism, there are some circumstantial evidences that creak in the production, and these are European Commission data, which shows the trade balance between EU and China. And we can easily notice that the trade balance is in deficit in favor of China. Here in this slide, we should also consider that EU exports goods with which are cleaner compared to the Chinese production. And this is easily to know because we have targets on renewables. So we have 20% of energy, final energy consumption coming from renewables. And we are much more sustainable than China. So we are exporting goods with low carbon, and we are importing high emissions intensity goods and products. Another indicator that creaks in this situation is the market share of some sectors. You all know and you are aware of the steel crisis that we had and still is ongoing. Here are the data. These are official data of the World Steel Association, public data, and we can see how the steel market share has changed during from 2003 to 2016, and we can notice that China tripled its share, and Europe has halved its percentages in this market. Also, US has halved his production, but is impressive the share of China. Another sector that is very much suffering in this context of globalization and other policies, which are factors, even maybe not the main drivers, but there are factors that impact the competitiveness of companies. We have the ceramic tiles, which is an excellent sector in Italy, and this sector is suffering a lot, and you can see that from 11% in 2000, they went to 3%, their market share in the world trade. And you see China has grown. Even for this sector, there are some anti-dumping measures that try to protect the ceramic tiles production, the European one. So there are some let's say, circumstantial evidences. Here I bring to your attention the emissions. We can easily see, but we also saw in the previous slides that you presented, that global emissions are growing. European emissions are going down, but they are easily compensated by the world emissions. And so EU is a leader, but should and must, maybe at this point, must do something to involve also other countries to adopt these binding objectives, or to stimulate the emission reduction worldwide, because it's not enough to reduce emissions only within the territory, the European Union territory. So in EU, we have tried several regulations, incentives, market, taxes for the emission reduction and to manage these negative externalities. The point is that the EU regulation and national regulations is normal that they apply within their territory. But this territorial application of the rule is also a limit. Is a limit because applies where the factory is physically located. And in order to reduce the global emission, we should think differently. Because the production that is made in a country nowadays is not consumed within that market. We all buy online, and the production maybe is made in China, but is easily consumed in France, in Italy, in other countries, or vice versa for something, for other products, for some products. Now EU, also European institutions and EU member states have noticed that there is a problem, an international problem linked to the industrial competitiveness of Europe, of industry, European industry. They are suffering the globalization. This is not only due to the environmental cost, but also environmental costs and energy costs are a component of this competitiveness that is let's say they are suffering international competitiveness. So the European Commission proposed the adoption of carbon measures. There are 4 options, but since 2013 that I have analyzed from a regulatory point of view what carbon border tax can, if can be a solution. I remember that in 2009 it was a very let's say the only proposal, the only one at European level, the French one proposal, that was the proposal of inclusion of the carbon, setting this carbon weight also to the including the importers on the ETS. I think that the carbon border tax, unfortunately, I mean, from my studies and my analysis, is not a solution, because we will have the ETS, which is a measure that has that is to which it is very difficult to attribute the emission reduction. Because it's a regulatory measure that has always been with low prices and was, I mean, it has a lot of problems. And ETS is a tax already now, a tax, let's say, on production. And if we adopt a carbon border tax is on import, and these are 2 totally different measures from a regulatory point of view and also from economical point of view. So there will be problems with WTO rules for discrimination between the local production, domestic production, and imported goods. And I believe that this tax would not defend the European production, because we should also think about the export. For example, I was mentioning the tiles sector, ceramic tiles. They export most of their production, so they will pay the costs in EU, and then when they export, they are not getting the rebates. Then if we adopt a carbon border tax, a tax at the border on the import, we will have likely commercial retaliation, and thinking that this can be a shield, let's say, in protecting companies. The European Commission also included in the Green Deal the fact that this new measure, it will be an alternative to other rules that in a way protect the carbon leakage sectors with free allowances for direct emissions and indirect emissions. And also the rise of the CO2 price that we are seeing recently it will become more and more a problem. And the impact of this measure, the high price of CO2, it will have an unpredictable effect on the industry. So I think that the task of the state is to create the rules and the system to award the environmentally friendly behaviors of the companies, because companies, if they do not have the clear rule and they are not awarded in their environmental friendly behavior, they won't do anything. But in Europe, they have done so much, because we have, thanks to the objectives, and now also the 55 package is coming, we have done so much. Now we are at the point that we need to give a value to this effort that we have done. So I have proposed since 2014 with a book, a proposal which is called Charge on Edit Emissions, which treats the CO2 direct and indirect emissions produced and incorporated in goods. Now, this proposal at EU level is also called Green VAT, and is also in discussion with some EU institutions, and we will see how things will go. The idea is to incorporate the cost of CO2 and enhance this cost within the VAT without discriminating products based on their origin of the country. So for me, it is not relevant where the production is made. It is important what is the carbon content of these goods. So this is the idea of this charge on edit emissions. In Italy is known with a different name, of course. And the idea is to set a standard and to say, for example, 1 ton of steel in an efficient production fabric emits X. These are indicative percentages. And if there are fabrics that are producing with lower emissions, they will get an award. So they will pay a lower VAT. If they emit more, they will pay the difference. With this proposal, the European companies they have an advantage in the competitiveness in this global context, because I said before, we are in a more sustainable, we live in a more sustainable context. So without going very much in details because of time constraints, I would like to just mention which are the main characteristics of these measures that I propose, and the main effects that can be. So the idea is to count the real emissions of products. And for this, we can also use the methodologies that we have within ETS. Apply this measure regardless the country of origin of the product. So we'll be in compliance with the WTO rules, with the methodology and also with the origin of the country. Give the possibility to who imports in EU and who use the EU market to prove that they are producing with clean energy. So to avoid using the average of the emissions of the country of origin, because can be much more sustainable companies also in China or in India or elsewhere that use the European market. And the traceability and the verification of emissions are core to this proposal. So, and this is very easy to do now. We can also, I have also written some articles that we can use for this. Also the blockchain for traceability and for the verification of emissions. We already have in place all the institutions that can do so. And to do it globally, it can be used the private companies, but the leadership of this verification should be on the hands of European Commission, because we cannot rely on the let's say national verifications of other countries. Let's think what happens with China before the Paris Agreement, that they hidden 17% of emissions of their emissions. So we should, as Europe, lead this and govern the mechanism if a similar mechanism can be adopted at EU level. And the standards is not difficult to set the standards. We already are familiar with a lot of standards. We use standards for cars, for other products. And the main effect, I'm not going to, because I also mentioned the main effects, but the main effect that I would like to mention is the reduction of emissions globally, because this mechanism stimulates the reduction of other countries, because when they export towards EU, they would like to have to pay a lower VAT, so they will reduce their emissions. And this is key. We talk about competitiveness, we talk about other frameworks, but we should remember always that all the measures that we adopt, they must consider the emission reduction. To conclude, is that, yeah, as I said at the beginning, the reallocation of businesses is an ongoing phenomena, very complex. There we have some circumstantial evidences of this phenomena. I believe that now EU should put environmental at the center of its policies and use because now it has the interest not only for the competitiveness but for driving and leading this climate change issue that we have. That if she puts the environment at the heart of his policies, I think it will be able to lead the world revolution, environmental revolution. I strongly believe that standards can lead these policies and can transform EU also in a continent, attractive continent for producing, because we have several targets with increasing shares of renewables, so other companies can come in Europe to produce because they have the benefits of VAT, because here in Europe you start with 20% or more of clean energy in your for your products. And of course, I would like also to say that this is not a solution for sure that that can be adopted for any environmental need, but I strongly believe that a correct application and changing the way of thinking, it is important to avoid also this jumping of companies from one country to another, to bring to help EU industry to gain competitiveness and to bring investments, jobs, and reach also the targets. Okay, I hope I respect myself the time. I stop here. Okay. Now I would give the floor to Gianluca Carino. He's a senior expert of the of AIEE. He collaborates with AIEE since several years now, and he also contributed to prepare this conference. He's also a member of the conference program committee. He graduated in economics with a thesis on climate change and collaborated in writing several studies published by AIEE for other institutions and associations. He today will present the circular economy, an essential pillar to achieve EU energy roadmap to 2050. Please, Gianluca Carino, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will share the screen. Good morning to everyone. Just a second. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to start saying thanks to AIEE and to all the organizers of this conference that give us the possibility to share our abstract on energy security, even in this situation, hard situation of global economy pandemic. I'm Gianluca Carrino. During this session, I will focus our attention on the energy economy, considered such as an essential pillar to achieve the European Energy Roadmap's goals to 2050. During this analysis, we will focus on different contents. In the first part, we will talk about the European Union targets, talking about the European Green Deal, a new rethinking energy market, and focusing on the new circular economy action. In the central part, we will talk about the transition toward the circular economy systems, focusing on the circularity process, talking about the plastic treatment. And in the last part, we will talk about the Italian strategies, speaking on PNIEC and the energy recovery and pyrolysis. In a scenario where the process of transition to a sustainable zero-emission economy has increasingly growing influence, a really and true use of circularity principle are needed in order to reduce and prevent waste from being dispersed into the environment or in landfill. In this scenario, it's fundamental the concept of circular economy. Firstly, the circular economy is a model of production and consumption that involves sharing, reusing, repairing, and recycling existing materials and products that as long as possible and collect them locally and responsibly. In this way, obviously, the life cycle of product is extended. With the circular economy, we can respect the European Directive 2006 that established that each European member state is required to consider waste as a raw material, reaching autonomy in eliminating waste, but even minimize waste transportation and their environmental impact. In this scenario, and in a scenario of a circular economy, it's fundamental the concept of cash from trash, that this means that giving an intrinsic value to waste may turn into an incentive to manage it correctly and prevent its dispersion in the environment, increasing not just the GDP, but even the employment and decreasing the dependence on foreign countries. Focusing on the European targets is really important, the European Green Deal, that is a comprehensive roadmap announced by President von der Leyen that has the goal to make Europe the first climate neutral continent in 2050 by cutting emissions, improving the health and the well-being of citizens and wildlife. The roadmap covers all sectors of the economies through a series of ambitious reforms such as sustainable industry, mobility and finance, but even implementing circular economy and clean energy, moving from farm to fork and increasing the elimination of pollution. Only an energy model will make the European system secure, competitive and sustainable in the long term. The Green Deal is considered the main pillar for the next generation. That's because it stimulates the abandonment of the traditional business model that has aggravated the inequalities worldwide. The 2030 key targets are basically the reduction of 55% of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990 levels, a minimum of 32% of renewable energy, and an improvement of at least 2.5% of energy efficiency. The energy efficiency is fundamental in order to achieve all the goals of the circular economy in all the energy chain, from energy generation to transmission, distribution, and use. The targets are fundamental in order to develop energy communities and smart infrastructure that are the main aspect to phasing out from fossil fuels, the decarbonizing in the same time the power sectors. It's really important, the new circular economy action plan, because it creates new opportunities for sustainable growth, reducing importation and waste, and making the energy economy sustainable and independent. The Circular Economy Action Plan presents measures to make sustainable products the norm in all the European Union, ensuring less waste, minimizing European waste exportation, tackling the illegal shipment, but even integrating circularity within people, regions, and cities in order to have this vision, this local vision. The Circular Economy Action Plan focuses on sectors where the potential for circularity is high, such as electronics, but even batteries and vehicles, packaging and plastic, construction, and food. The transition towards a circular economy is already underway, with businesses, consumers, and public authorities that in Europe are embracing this sustainable model. The European Commission will make sure that circular economy transition delivers opportunities for all, not leaving no one behind. The most important positive benefits are in terms of GDP growth and jobs creation. In fact, by 2030, European Union can increase its GDP by an additional of 0.5% and create around 700,000 new jobs, green jobs. In order to have a better vision of how this circularity process works, we will analyze the behavior of plastics, starting from the consumption by private and industrial end users. How can we see? The consumption phase is composed by the use phase. In fact, at the end of the use phase of the product, the product can be reused and repaired, or can be sent to the waste collection that is divided in energy recovery, recycling, and landfill. The most green and sustainable sectors are the energy recovery and recycling. In fact, in order to achieve the circular economy targets, we need to decrease the use of landfills, achieving the zero landfill level. In order to have a better idea on how was the evolution of plastic post-consumer waste treatment in Europe in the period includes between 2006 and 2018, we can use these graphs from Plastic de Facto 2020 that said that in 2018, the total waste collected by European Union was to 29.1 million of tons, the 19% higher than the collected plastic post-consumer compared with 2006 levels. Exactly, the recycling increased around 100%, the energy recovery around 77%, and the use of landfill decreased around 44% comparing to the level of 2006. Since 2006, the amount of plastic waste sent to recycling has doubled, but it's really important to say that the 25% of all the plastic post-consumer waste was still sent to landfill in 2018. This means that we need to decrease the use of landfill in order to achieve the energy economy goals. What's happened? Okay. Another important information is that since 2018, we can observe a decline of the European plastic industry production that's most linked to the COVID-19 pandemic that has clearly intensified this decline. In fact, in 2020, the demand and the consumption of plastic decreased effectively. In the first 6 months of the year, in fact, we had a sharp drop in the production that has started again in the second half of the year, and it will continue in 2021, achieving the level before of the COVID-19 just in 2022. The speed of recovery depends on the impact of the pandemic and on the demand for plastic from important customer industries like automotive and construction sector. The reduction is fundamental in order to stimulate the use of biodegradable plastic that are derived from biological substances rather than petroleum. In order to have an Italian vision, we have to talk about the Italian strategies called PNIEC, so the National Integrated Plan for Energy and Climate. The PNIEC is divided in 5 intervention lines that will develop in an integrated manner. Those lines are the decarbonization, the efficiency, the energy security, the market development, indoor and the search, innovation and competitiveness. In order to be consistent with the circularity principles, we need to reduce the emissions in waste sector that are mainly linked to the reduction of landfills with the goals to achieve the 10% of use of landfill in 2035, increasing separated waste collection and so the consequent recycling, and increase the use of energy recovery. But what is this energy recovery that we are talking about since like 5 minutes? The Italian, firstly, we will talk about the recycling and the energy recovery after, see this shot on the plastic, from Plastic the Fact 2020, where we can analyze the evolution of plastic post-consumer waste treatment in Italy. In 2018, how the graph shows, there was 3.6 million tons of plastic were collected through official schemes. But from 2016 to 2018, the volumes of recycling increased around 7.4%, and even the energy recovery by 1.5%, and the landfill around 1.1%. This means that Italy landfill is still the most used plastic waste treatment. What is the energy recovery process? The energy recovery process is a conversion of non-recyclable waste materials into usable heat, electricity, or fuel through a variety of processes, including combustion, gasification, pyrolyzation, anaerobic digestion, and landfill gas recovery. The importance of the energy recovery is that reduce and decrease the need of fossil fuels-based energy recovery, and also reduces the methane emissions generated by landfill, respecting the circular economy principle. The pyrolysis is an aspect of the energy recovery, and it works using a reactor that burns with the temperature of 700, between 700 and 800 degrees, with an absence of oxygen, so without combustion and CO2 emissions. Due to the effect of the heat, the plastic decomposes into gases and oils. And an important thing of the pyrolysis is that the resulting fuels are the liquid fuels that has low carbon content, the syngas that covers the energy needs of the process when renewable energy is not available from the electricity grid, and the chair that is used in construction and cement sectors. The most similarities between thermal incinerators and pyrolysis are firstly that they can convert plastic waste into viable energy, and that both technologies have similar cost. The most important difference are that the thermal incinerator is an exothermic process that produces energy from the combustion of waste, transforming thermal energy into electricity. It has the filtration system capable to decrease and reduce the 70% of the ash and harmful dust filtered, but the 30% of the cancerogenic nanoparticles are, however, released into the atmosphere. Another important point is that the thermal incinerator exploits the scale effect of the market. That means that is not very adaptable to small businesses. The pyrolysis system is an endothermic process that provides more flexible ways of storing energy than incineration. It transforms, how we said before, in absence of oxygen, waste into solid, liquid, or gaseous products without emitting dioxide or CO2. So it's not really harmful and dangerous for human health. And the amount of its waste is minimal. And for this reason, they can prevent the landfill pollution. One of the most important characteristics of the pyrolysis is that it works great even in small systems. So it's perfect to achieve goals such as smart cities and energy community. So it's perfect in the situation of used waste in a local way. In order to achieve the circular economy goals, is important driving force to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, respecting planets, and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The aims is to promote circularity in all the value chain, but it's necessary to encourage the circular economy using economic instruments such as environmental taxation, green tax reforms, and extended producer responsibility. The transition to circular economy will be systemic, deep, and transformative. In fact, we need to act at all levels: European, national, regional, local, but even international. Therefore, the European Union Commission, in order to achieve the 2050 energy goals proposed by the roadmap, invites institutions and bodies, encouraging member states to adopt or update their national circular economy strategies, plans, and measures. Thank you so much for your attention, and I would like to finish my presentation with this important sentence by Rio Declaration on Environment and Development 1992 that said, peace, development, and environmental protection are interdependent and indissoluble. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. Yeah, also circular economy is so key to this process of decarbonization. I don't know if you have any question, because in the chat I don't read any question from outside. I don't know if they can write. If you allow me, I would pose a question to Mr. Dufault. I followed your presentation with attention, and so if I understood well, you apply this cost push model with a price that varies in 3 steps, okay? And as an output, it will be, I mean, different levels of CO2 price, which are linked to the amount of the import from other countries. And so this will result in different CO2 prices within EU. My question is, if I understood it well, is but do you think this having different CO2 prices within EU can be a sort of a step back, because now we have the emission trading scheme, we have European auctions, and your proposal is where it will be placed, and is a kind of alternative of the emission trading scheme, or it will be a measure that is included or can be included in the as a carbon border adjustment measure, let's say.
Okay, I will first maybe re-explain the idea of the Leontief model. Just the idea of this model is that you know, when there are exchanges, the supply chain is very long. There are many points, and this kind of model they could sum up all the exchanges, and then we can see how many times a single unit of carbon is used in every industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that if this unit is taxed on the first industry, the amount of the tax is reported all along the supply chain. If the second industry is taxed, so the amount is reported all along supply chain again. So at the end of the supply chain, there are many cumulated effects of the tax. And my idea is so to take into account this number of little tax in every step to see what is the final effects on the final price of a product.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just to explain the idea. And I don't propose different prices of CO2. I just propose 2 scenarios. One with a current euro by sorry, a $40 by ton of CO2 in European countries or in France or Germany, and other scenario, but there is no link, of $80 by ton of CO2. But it is just the same price in Europe or in a country. There are no different prices by industry.
Okay.
So it was your first question. And can you remind me the end of your question?
Yeah,
carbon tax?
I was asking if you have already an idea what can be the impact on environment, but how you will structure this measure, or the idea of the application of this CO2 price within the current framework, or different with the new measure that is coming, or within the ETS? I mean, what was the idea?
Oh, the idea started a few years ago when we were speaking about applying a carbon tax in European products. So it was maybe 6 years ago. Oh, it's been so long. And yes, that's why I like your idea, because for me it was the same, not the same, but I didn't see the difference between doing on the product side or on the consumer. For me, it came back to the same. So that's why I love your presentation. And the idea I can really answer, because I don't really know how they do. Just you know it better. Just the idea is when you emit, you said that the European Commission can compute it, and in the industry is to see, so you emit this amount with tax at the level you emit, then your price will be higher, and your output will be more expensive. And we do it at every step in the supply chain. And I like the fact that if we do that, except in Germany or in Poland, it won't penalize countries or industries a lot. A bit, because for 2 or 3% of price increases is maybe, I don't know if it's big or not, to be honest, as if I don't know, if your output price increased by 3%, I don't know if it's really big or not. My impression is not that big, but from an industrial point of view, it may be very expensive. So
Let me bring you, I don't want, first I would like to ask if others have questions, and then I can bring an example on this. I don't know if there are questions. We have just 2 minutes. For example, for the ceramic tiles that I have examined in 2017, for a meter square of tiles, ceramic tiles, we had a price in Italy which is a little bit lower to 6 euros. No, sorry, to 9.5 euros. And in China, it was a little bit lower to 6 euros. So you see the difference is very high if we consider the competitiveness of the single products, let's say. This is much higher than 2%, of course.
50%.
But it impacts. Yeah, it impacts. Also 2% impacts, yes.
Yeah, but in your example, it's maybe 50%, from 6 to 9. 2% is for 6 to 6.3% euros. So it's a very small gap. So I really don't know if their margin, I don't know the word, if is a difference, the margin is high or not. Really depend, I think, on the industry.
Yeah, it's true, but I think that if we consider not just once, but it's something that is it goes accumulated, because the objectives and regulations, and I mean the context is always becoming more stringent. If we have a view of this globalization context, is becoming, how can I say, the margins of the profits of the European companies is going to be smaller and smaller. I mean, the reduction, a sort of linear reduction, let's say.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem. But
I don't know if there are other questions. Otherwise, I need to close the session. It was a pleasure to hear and to listen to your presentation, your research. I need to close because now with virtual conferences, we have to be very respectful of the schedule, and other sessions will start. It was a pleasure again, and I close this session.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure too.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.